started becoming every single mom at some point will come and be like, I don't have the capacity to disappoint someone or to speak my truth. And these are strong, working, not in the home, like all these multidimensional. It's not just like one.
The most powerful shift was my own inner shift that Tejal, you do so beautifully and facilitate for parents and caregivers of children.
We tried to address that limbic hijack through food, alcohol, some other buffering, procrastination, anything where you're tense. You're like, let me numb myself. And a lot of those can be destructive, but you're sharing here are really easy ways to break that pattern.
So Dinesh, we have another attorney on our show today.
I know, 2 in a row, right?
2 in a row.
And I feel like attorney, reformer.
Reformed attorney.
Yeah.
I feel like some days I'm outnumbered with attorneys, but in this case, this reformed attorney, I'm so excited to have on because she's actually my soul sister. And we have had so many incredible parenting insights and journeys together. She's been so supportive, especially when I started my own Instagram page. She was one of the first ones to sort of see me and really validate. I think at that point, definitely, I still do, I'm human. So I rely on external validation sometimes to make me feel like I'm not just grossly failing. But this mama is one of the first to have really come by my side and reach out to me, and has been a really, really special person for years now. So I'm so excited. And you know her through another part of your life. How do you know this person?
I just know her as a force of nature. Tejal Patel has been, everywhere on, like when I started to get online, and then through Kunal KMAC, when I joined the fitness journey there. I met Tejal in Atlanta and also met Chirag, her husband. Shout out to Chirag, who's a great Chiefs fan, and we're going to have to take in a Chiefs game soon. But I just think Tejal and Chirag, what they're doing and everything they stand for with their kids, we have similar age kids as well, just really all around great people, great influences. And, they exemplify what we all try to aspire to, which is happy and human on this podcast.
Absolutely. Tejal, welcome.
Oh gosh, guys, I want to take a moment to just take in the beautiful love and kindness that you just bestowed upon me. And I highlight everything, Seema, that you shared. It was such a divine synchronicity meeting you. And I'm so honored to be here. And Dinesh, man, I feel like the minute that you came online, you are also equally a force of nature. You just have this very exuberant energy and spirit to you. So it's such an honor to be here with both of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. This has been a while in the making, and it is a highlight of my day. So we're excited to talk about all the things with the one and only Tejal Patel.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So Tejal, before we jump into it, I want our listeners to make sure they know a little bit about your background and everything. So can you just share a quick little, a glimpse into who Tejal really is?
It's so funny, this question, right? The more that you live life, it's like harder and harder to decipher like all the multi hyphenates that we are into like this itty bitty little sentence. But truly my essence is, like you guys shared, a former divorce attorney, did it for quite some time, long enough to know that this was just not what my life purpose was. But I feel like I've always been a lover of psychology. What makes people like make the choices? What are behind people's emotions? And so even being a divorce attorney was in some odd ways very fulfilling, because I got to see people in this extreme stress and trauma response in their life and look at it from a lens of compassion. Even then, like looking at it from a lens of humanity, like how to humanize these individuals going through this most traumatic experience. Next to death, I think divorce is like equally as traumatic. And so, being a mediator, you're with both parties, like taking it in, soaking it in, understanding these dynamics. And really, from there, my essence, I went the complete other route and I started teaching kids yoga and meditation and mindfulness in schools. Just really understanding that the divorce mediation part of me awakened the parts of me as I was
Hmm.
talking about their children, of like the places where I related to these children in the sense of anxiety and developmental trauma and just this lack of capacity to understand and be with emotions, just this inept emptiness, I would say. And so that led me to being with children, which is the complete opposite vibration of joy and play and pleasure. And it was just the most remarkable 8 years of my life because I was because of my own childhood, which we'll probably touch upon, I
Hmm.
didn't even know if I wanted to have kids. Like I was so convinced I'm going to F them up and I'm not going to do that because I had all the models of what not to do as a parent and I had no idea what it looked like to be a good, emotionally balanced and stable parent. So I was like, I'm not going to do that
Yeah.
to somebody else. I'm just not going to have kids. I'm just going to teach kids yoga. I'm going to play with other people's kids and teach them all the things that I wish I learned when I was a kid. And then that eventually like opened me up. I think being with kids cracked me open. I was like, no, deep down you really do want kids.
Hmm.
And simultaneously I was working on my own inner healing journey. And there were some key components that happened that really helped me see from a lens that this has happened to you, but you are not your mother, and you
Hmm.
can I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was like, you will be a different mother. There was some like iterations of uh confidence that I can be a mother. And that
Yeah.
led me on to my motherhood journey,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
which eventually then transpired into coaching women and
Hmm.
moms specifically. And it was like I shared, you always coach and teach what it is that your soul needs to learn and to
Yeah.
embody. And
Yeah.
at that time, it was like Ayan, my oldest, was 3. He was like entering into that toddler phase, which we all
Mm-hmm.
know, right? You go from the baby and the cuteness and you kind of control everything to the now they have their own voice. And it's like, oh
Hmm.
my gosh, why is it some days that I'm like calm and can handle things, and other days I completely snap and lose it and I have no ability to like control my emotions? And that's what led me down to self-regulation work and Ayurveda and vagus nerve and the science behind the parasympathetic nervous system. I think the geekiness of like learning never left me, and so I got
Hmm.
trained in somatic therapy, and really understanding the lens of regulation and trauma. And
Hmm.
so that's where I'm at right now, is really focusing on not only supporting children through this lens, healing myself, but also holding space for other parents as they're navigating their own journey of healing their trauma, as well as trying to be the most regulated parent they can be.
Yeah. And in all of that, I think it's first of all so funny that not only did you go from I'm not wanting to be a mom to now you're the mother of 3 beautiful children. And you've also authored a book that's won awards and it's in my
Hmm.
house. My daughter's, refers to it and I see it out in the wild and I think, "Oh my gosh, that's my friend." You wrote Meditation for Kids.
Hmm.
And it's such if listeners, if you have not looked at this book or heard of this book, please go check it out. If especially if you have younger ones, even if they're babies, it's great to sort of get yourself familiar with these concepts of how to help your child regulate. And the secret kind of here is when you do that with the lens of, oh, I'm going to help my kiddo, you actually
Hmm.
start to shift yourself.
Yeah.
And that's really truly, for me at least, the most powerful shift was my own inner shift that Tejal, you do so beautifully and facilitate for parents and caregivers of children who are, I know the book is for 8 and under. My daughter's almost 10 and she still sometimes will sip strawberry smoothies and check her buttons and do all of these things. So it's a fantastic book that happened as a result of you sort of shedding these layers of your old self.
Yeah, and that book, the beauty of it too is that it is so much easier as an adult, especially these concepts of meditation and breath work, to enter through the lens of play
Hmm.
because we can do that. we can do as a parent. We play with our kids and have to be silly and goofy. But the root of that, the beauty of that is it's all rooted in ancient Ayurvedic science. So the breath
Hmm.
work, that sipping strawberry smoothies, that's the breath that is necessary when we're trying to cool our nervous system down after we feel angry. So that's what's like the beauty is it's like it's helping us and we don't even realize it because it's working our nervous system and our body exactly the way it's supposed to. So we'll feel that sense of relief. So yeah, it makes my heart so happy whenever it never gets old when you hear like my child uses the book, even if it's like a couple of the that's like oh those 8 years of me like intensively working with kids. It's like the gift of that is
Yeah.
keeps on giving. So thanks for
Hmm.
sharing that.
Yeah.
So good. You did a great job of taking those principles and modernizing them in a way that people really can relate to them and not feel like they're really stepping out of their comfort zone to incorporate all of those different breath works and different channels into everyday life. So congratulations on what a success.
Ugh, the kids, right? The
Yeah.
kids. I think about it, the first class that I ever taught, the kids that I taught, they're now 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I think about, and there's this one mom that I still am in touch with,
Mm.
and she's like, my son still, like, he remembers your class. I still catch him taking deep breaths. So for me to know that this book is in so many homes worldwide, and even
Wow.
if that child takes one
Hmm.
thing, like their life is going to be so much different when they're in a moment of chaos or, trauma. And
Yeah.
that just like
Well,
brings me so much. I could cry when I think of that.
Well, it's not only their lives, like that 15-year-old, right? The lessons that I've seen that we learn as coaches and things like that, we're not the primary beneficiaries. The beneficiaries
Hmm.
are the people that come after us. So you're with that, in any type, anything like this that we do, we're changing generations, right? Like Ed Milet talks about, in every family there comes a person who says, you know what, this is it. Like we're going to end
Yeah.
whatever generational issues or whatever has been inherited. And I kind of adopted that. I say that I'm going to screw up my kids, just not in the same way I was screwed up. Like as long as they have different problems, I've been successful, right?
Right.
I
Um,
love
right.
it.
And it takes a lot of pressure off, but it also reminds me that I have a responsibility to not propagate the same things that
Mm.
I sort of internalized, intentionally or unintentionally, and that we have an opportunity to change. That's the important thing, is that once you realize, I think you have an opportunity to change, you're empowered, the hope comes back, the inspiration comes back, and you're willing to try, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a lens that I look at this now. I mean, I'm writing my second book and it's literally about this, like being a second generation immigrant of South Asian, descent and the developmental trauma that we experience. And
Mhm.
the lens that I look at is like, each one of our collective generations had its own
Right.
purpose and healing. And our parents, they were focused on, every human has three needs: physical, emotional, and spiritual.
Hmm.
They were the barrier breakers. They came to hold that scaffolding and that foundation for us to even be having these conversations about
Right.
people pleasing or emotional regulation or even delving into the inner world. So that
Right.
scaffolding needed to be there because they were the barrier breakers giving us the physical needs that we had. And so for you taking the lens of, our collective is the emotional needs, meeting our own emotional needs, being those cycle breaker parents and helping like exactly like you said, like our kids are not going to have the same problems or the same trauma that what we had.
Hmm.
And the spiritual needs, I look at it even like the third lens of spiritual needs. Our kids are going to wake up someday and their kids are going to come in being able to like do telekinesis and have
Yeah.
telepathy. And they'll be like, well, you didn't support my spiritual needs of connecting me to my higher truths and my gifts. And so
Yeah.
there is always going to be, as we spiritually evolve, there's going to be needs, right? That we're just, this is what
Right.
we're focusing on. And I love that because it gives us grace to be like, okay, let's meet our parents where they were and what their capacity
Hmm.
was, but also meet ourselves as parents, what our capacity is, and, have the humility to know that one day our kid will look at us like, you fell short here, and be like, yes, you're right. I did the best I could.
Yeah.
And with the tools that I had.
But isn't that the point? The point is, like our fathers or mothers facilitated this evolution, right? Rather than thinking that we're going to fall short, like I view sort of our purpose is to facilitate the next generation of evolution by taking care of, like our parents did, of those basic necessities of food, water, education, things like that, to facilitate this higher evolution and further progressing our kids. In the journey of self-awareness and what role they play on this planet and how they can be of service and really uncovering their purpose, not simply, to be a robot or to provide for food or to
Mm.
exchange time for money. There is an evolution. So I think it's a little bit easier for me when I think of it that way, that I'm
Yeah.
I'm here just to facilitate the next rung up the ladder.
Mm.
That is so beautifully said. I completely agree with that sentiment. It's you're right. It's not a falling short. It's like we are facilitating that next level of them being able to embody their essence, right? Their
Mhm.
their true essence. They're so connected to the core of who they are. So being service to others is just a natural propellant of like what they're here to do.
Mhm.
And it's not going to look as traditional like what it did for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so, I was going to say something very similar in that just holding compassion for our parents because they're doing the best
Hmm.
that they knew how to do or could do. And many of our listeners, their parents they immigrated to Canada or the United States or, maybe somewhere else. And, um, that's trauma in and of itself. So to have that and then come from that and be able to say, all right, now let's take care of ourselves. And then importantly, let's turn our eyes to the kids and see how we can do differently it's a gift. So, but speaking of, let's talk about this for a little bit. So the idea of here we are coming from our parents and we are culturally from this um we have this tendency to say, look kya kahenge, right? What will people say if I don't become a lawyer, I don't become a doctor? We're always looking at what is your aunt going to say if you show up to her house and you don't eat her food or you're, wearing this or your hair looks like that. We're constantly making remarks, or at least when I was growing up, people constantly made remarks about what I looked like, how I wore my hair, how I wore my clothes, what kind of grades I got, whether I ate or not, whether I talked to people or not. Like it was constant. And that led me, and I really believe I'm seeing it in my coaching clients and my friends and, just other conversations I'm having, is this real need to people please that's coming through. And I know you talk about that a lot, Tejal. So can you kind of share with us and the listeners, because I don't think that although the label of people pleasing can be obvious, I don't know that everyone necessarily has the same definition of it. So can you sort of make that concrete for our listeners so that
Hmm.
we can have the rest of this conversation being on the same page?
Yeah. I saw such a trend, and we look at people pleasing as a personality trait. Oh, I'm just a people pleaser. I'm just a nice and polite person. I'm easygoing. I put other people's needs before mine. And we think of this one, maybe in a negative, but sometimes it's like a badge of honor. I'm the type of person that I put other people first. Like I'm a good, nice person. And
Mm-hmm.
Right.
so it's really incessive because it's pervasive in our society, yet sometimes we're not even aware of it because it is so underlying all of our interactions that we're not even consciously aware of, whether it's
Yeah.
like our ability to set a boundary, not set a boundary, the reflexiveness of how we show up in relationships. And so when I was understanding trauma and the lens of somatics, essentially meaning like how trauma creates sensations in our body. Like our subconscious mind from a somatic lens, the subconscious is the soma, meaning
Hmm.
that your trauma and the energy, your emotions live in the body. So you may have a thought, but the paradox in the alchemy is that if the thought has a wound underneath it, it is creating a physical sensation in your body.
Hmm.
There's a bracing, there's a constriction, there's a tension. And a lot
Hmm.
of times when we have just learned to dissociate or leave our body, to exit into our mind, to overthink, or to use other external things to numb, we're not even consciously aware that this is happening in our body. So
Hmm.
when I think of people pleasing from a somatic lens, what is happening to our body physically? It's actually the fourth trauma response. So everyone knows fight because it's the most in your face, it's the most propellant, it's the most, I think the most prevalent one that we see. There's also flight, which we are so overwhelmed by what's happening, but our need is to just run away from the situation. There's
Hmm.
freeze. Those situations where someone confronts you and it's like your mind goes blank and you're like, wait, and you don't say anything. And then you come back online later and you're like, I should have said this and this and this and this. And you're like, all of that comes flooding back. But in that moment, you're blank. It's like your survival is based on, I just don't want to be seen. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to play small. And then the fourth is fawning.
Hmm.
And fawning is a mixture of freezing, but it's also performative,
Hmm.
meaning you have this expression that wants to come up, this authentic expression of how you feel. But there's this programming of I need to be nice or I need to, exactly you said, what is that person going to feel? There's an outward attunement before the expression and it happens so fast that
Yeah.
there's this physical bracing that happens. Literally, if you're with your body, it's like your body presses up against that expression that wants to come out and something performative comes out, a reflexive smile, or yeah, let's do it. Somebody asks you, hey, let's go out to dinner. You feel like, oh, I'm tired, I don't want to go. Your mind is like, no, but she's going to feel disappointed if I say no. Boom, yeah, let's do it, let's do it. And you can see it's like this reflexive just nature that comes out.
Yeah.
And it happens so fast because our culture and our society have given the pat on the head. It's praised. It's even glorified that to do this, right? Because you're easygoing, you're pleasant, you're polite,
Hmm.
you're the performative nature is like what people want because on the opposite spectrum, it's there that other person's unmet attachment needs are being met by you performing.
Hmm.
Their codependency of needing you to whatever it may be, to make them feel seen, make them feel important, make them feel validated by you performing, they're getting their hit of their emotional needs being met. So it's this codependent relationship that we've like been, seeing. And once you see it, and for me, it was really a recollection in my coaching clients where it started becoming every single mom at some point will come and be like, I don't have the capacity to disappoint someone or to speak
Hmm.
my truth. And these are strong, working, not in the home, like all these multidimensional. It's not just like one, like, oh, it's a stay-at-home mom or a working mom.
Hmm.
It's like you're all interdimensions, and it's like this inability to speak your truth. And it's a person. It could be
Yeah.
one specific person that they really struggle with of like setting a boundary with and really permissive with. And a lot of times it shows up in the parenting. That's where it really shows up. It's like I don't have the capacity to hold a boundary and I let it bypass. I let it bypass. And then it
Hmm.
becomes incongruent and strong and rigid and fearful. And it's creating disconnection in my relationship with my child. So
Yeah.
it's like all these parenting to relationships to our own relationship with our parents. It's like this is like a underlying factor of how is this reflexive, performative, uh, expression coming out that is squashing my authentic expression. And
Yeah.
that's what comes out in a lens of what people pleasing is.
Hmm.
Interesting.
What do you say? And I want to just quickly touch on the other side of the coin, right? What do you say to someone who recognizes all of this, but intentionally makes the deliberate calculation that, you know what, I don't feel like going to dinner right now, but the consequence is if I say no for the 19th time, that person is going to eventually not ask me any longer. And that's not what I want, right? So maybe in the moment, this moment right here, I'm just tired and it's a temporary inconvenience. And on balance, I better go to keep the relationship, not because I want to people please this person in that moment, but like I don't want the consequence of them thinking or whatever. And I get
Hmm.
all of the nuances in there. Or the other side of what that might look like that's my love language. It makes me
Mm.
happy to make things easier for you. And if I could, like if my son comes home and my son says, Dad, you want to go get ice cream? And I'm like, yeah, I want to buy you ice cream. And I know it's bad for you. And I know I'm only doing it because it'll make you happy. But that makes me happy. And life is short and we don't know what tomorrow will bring. Um, what would you say to that flip side where it is invasive, it is incisive and has all the negative components, but it's kind of, I'm okay with that. I want to do that even though I'm justifying to myself that that's in my best interest. And I know you have a lot of thoughts about this because it's very easy to cross the lines, right? And to set boundaries and rationalize not setting boundaries. So if you have any thoughts on that, please let us know.
Tons, tons. So when we're talking about fawning being a trauma response, it's because you're working against your capacity. Like your body is having an expression, but you're bracing against it.
Hmm.
What you're explaining in these beautiful instances, you can't have a conversation without talking about boundaries when it comes to people pleasing. They are like brother and sister, yin
Hmm.
and yang.
Hmm.
And so when you think of boundaries, boundaries are all about, it's not about this like line in the sand that we think of like this stays out, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. Boundaries, if you look at it from somatics, it's simply in this moment, if I'm attuned, what is my body's capacity?
Mm.
And in that moment, when you were talking about like the ice cream with your son, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, whether it's like the cognitive aspect of it, your body had capacity to be like, hey, yeah, I can. There's a fluidity there. Like, I do want this moment of connection. The
Hmm.
moment presented you with something, you tuned into your body of like, is this something that's in alignment? Like, do I have this desire? And
Mm.
it's not perform when it's not, and when there's an expansiveness there, that's not a
Hmm.
trauma response. That
Okay.
expansiveness in that moment is saying that you have capacity for what it is that's happening. It
Mm.
could be it could be the next day where you had 5 podcast episode interviews, you were drained and depleted, and the same ask is made, but your body's in a completely different state. It's
Hmm.
in a completely different energetic state. And that in that moment, the capacity to be like, no, I just want to lay down on the couch. And it will be in that moment, if you're honoring your capacity, be like, hey, bud, I would really love to. I just don't have the capacity today, but we can
Yeah.
plan for another day. And that's the difference right there.
Mm.
Because on one, it's not about like the firmness of do I go or do I not go? It's like, what in that moment does your body have capacity for? And if you tune into your body and that constriction or that expansion and you express through that, it's not performative because
Yeah.
it's authenticity in that moment. So
Hmm.
Yeah.
that's the nuance of this whole thing. It's like really engaging and relating to your body and not so much of your mind of like what this person, it's not overly attuning to what this person needs. It's like in my body, I do feel this desire to connect with them.
Mm.
And in that moment, if you're like, oh gosh, like if you're tuned into it, you're like, oh gosh, I understand the consequence possibly of being saying no for the 19th time. But if that person on the other side, if you're really clear, like, hey, I actually genuinely would love to connect with you, but my body, like I just don't have the bandwidth today. And you
Yeah.
take the initiative, like, hey, like I'd love to, like maybe we can do it next week. There's a
Hmm.
difference there because there's no
Absolutely.
like constriction in you, and the other person will feel it if you're coming from an embodied space.
And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of where there's so much that happens that is not something that we're conscious of. It's not tangible. We can't necessarily hear it, but we can sense it in some way, whether that's feeling it, but when we're talking and we feel like it's a genuine comment versus maybe something that's a little bit more forced, we may just walk away feeling like I think something's a little off. but we won't be able to go beyond that, right? Because it's not tangible. And so
Hmm.
what I loved what you kind of drew out there. But my question is, not everyone really can understand what it means to be in your body, or to know when you're bracing against something in your body, or to understand the words like expansive versus. So how, what would you say to someone who is brand new to this idea that our bodies actually are sensing far more and we have more input, but our minds have just sort of shut. We've cut off that communication, right? So how would you explain this to them?
Oh, I love that you're asking this question, because that's usually what the case is for many of us when we have learned to disassociate and disengage with our body. And so the beauty of like when you don't have to be in that moment, say, of conflict or that conversation to be able to access what your body is experiencing. So what I mean by that, like when I'm coaching with my clients, it's like bringing up like, okay, bring up a moment where you felt like
Mm-hmm.
you had to squash your expression to something, where you people
Hmm.
pleased. In that moment of them just visualizing it, their body is going to go exactly back to the same place where it was, and they'll feel it. It's like it's almost instantaneously. So I always suggest, like, having someone to guide you is always helpful, but you can do it by yourself. You're in the safety of your own home. That's the first thing, is being able to take in the environment that you're in. And so, our bodies are very primal. They're still animalistic. And so you have to remind yourself, you can't be like, I'm present. It's like turning around and looking and actually like gazing at something behind you. This actually activates your mind and your body to be like, okay, I am safe. Like I can return
Hmm.
back to my body. That's the first thing that many people just need to be able to feel safe in their body, because their
Interesting.
body has been the ground of, could be a war field at times,
Hmm.
right? It feels
Mm-hmm.
so uncomfortable in being in the sensation. We've lived a lifetime escaping from it. So to give that ask of coming back to your body is like, okay, training yourself how to bring safety back into it. And it's
Hmm.
as simple as, think of it like a deer in the forest looking at a lion, right? We are still those primitive beings. So
Yeah.
a deer, if they see a lion in its vicinities, their nervous system completely changes. Their eyes will not leave their prey. It is hyper focused on that. So think about it. Like they're not looking up at the sky or looking at the grass and eating, or like, oh, they're in tune, hyper vigilant on their threat and that thing
Yeah.
that's going to overwhelm them. Now, the same thing happens with us, right? When we are constantly living in this, you know, chronic, acute state of stress, our body is always on alert. Even the posture that we're sitting in is activating that fight or flight, like be on alert, as if there might be a lion that's trickling around somewhere. So
Yeah.
by the simple act of looking behind you, think about it. A deer would never look behind it if there's a threat. So when you're scanning your environment, your brain instantly starts recognizing and starts taking in the room, and your peripheral vision starts opening up.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so, as simple as turning around, placing your eye gaze at something, and then allow yourself to see the room, that's like you're looking at like a picture, for example, or a plant, but see the walls, see the ceiling, see the floor, and that's going to engage your parasympathetic system. Be like, okay, I'm safe. I'm
Yeah.
safe to be in my body. That's going to be the first thing, is like build safety before you feel any charge, because
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's gonna
good.
actually, counteract it. Like, oh, how do I feel the charge? Once you feel safety in your body and you feel that expansion, it's so easy to then start tuning in to, when am I not feeling that sense of relief,
Yeah.
that sense of
Mm-hmm.
settledness.
Yeah.
And so, as simple as, and I have it here, when it's pillows are really, really helpful in being able to have a boundary when that emotion feels so big. When you're sitting for the very first time in this place of, I'm people pleasing because I don't have the capacity of someone being disappointed at me, Oh, that's huge. That
Hmm.
is huge. That lives in your body. That is like, it's gonna feel like for me, the bracing is always in my stomach. When I feel my
Yeah.
Hmm.
belly like tensing, and generally it's the same kind of things. It's like the belly tensing up, the chest for some people. Sometimes it's the throat.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like the mind. It's some sort of physical sensation that you'll feel like where it's like caving in or closing in and there's tension. And having
Hmm.
a pillow to kind of put pressure on the place that is feeling uncomfortable or tender. It's like a
Yeah.
little child holding their teddy bear. It's creating a safety net for you to be able to unfurl and expand into that space. And when
Yeah.
you have that pressure on you, you'll realize, okay, something's holding me. It's not gonna like
Right.
it's not going to kill me if I unfurl into this experience. There's something holding me, even like getting very acutely aware of what is supporting me in this moment. I'm sitting on this chair.
Hmm.
It's keeping me up. Like I'm feeling my
Hmm.
back. And also like if you're doing this work, I always have make sure my clients have their neck supported. You're not supporting yourself at all. Like you're laying down or your neck is supported on a chair so your body can completely get into a state of relaxation. And in that, from
Hmm.
that space, you
Yeah.
can allow the memory to come up and the sensation to come up, and
Hmm.
then you can be with it. And just like this, Dinesh, this won't make much sense to you, but for Seema, this will make sense. Is that, when you have a labor contraction, there is a crescendo that goes up, there's a peak, and it goes down. It's
Hmm.
just like the waves, Dinesh.
Hmm.
The waves have that. That's the same lifespan of an emotion. But a lot of
Hmm.
times, what we do, especially with people pleasing, the underlying stories of
Hmm.
I can't sit with someone being angry at me, someone being disappointed at me. We internalize that as guilt. Like it's so uncomfortable to sit with that we
Yeah.
never let the lifespan of that sensation. We will bypass it in some way, and the
Hmm.
way that we bypass it is through that people pleasing and that performativeness.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's really good. I mean, motion creates emotion, right? And that's why, like, when you're really stressed or angry, if you go for a workout, you can feel that energy drain out of you. And everything you talked about, turning around, because you don't have eyes behind your head and you're able to see behind that there's nothing there, holding something, supporting your neck, reminded me of that, we're using our physical body to interrupt the hijack, the limbic hijack that our brain is in to almost create reassurance, right? And
Hmm.
and I think the important thing of all of that, at least for me, tell me if I'm wrong, is that too often we try to address that limbic hijack through food, alcohol, some other buffering, procrastination, anything where you're tense. You're like, I can't get through this. Let me numb myself with something that feels good in the moment.
Hmm.
And a lot of those can be destructive, but what you're sharing here are really easy ways to break that pattern so that you can snap yourself out of it and in the meantime let the emotion ride through and then come back um, when your problem solving and creativity and rational thinking is no longer in a state of hijack, which is like that deer and staring at the lion. And I think that's critical for a lot of people, not only in what you're talking about, but even in high pressure careers and things like that. Because when we're stressed, our body is producing cortisol and
Hmm.
hormones for activating our body to perform, like to run away from the lion. In the meantime, we're not sleeping well, we're not regenerating, we're not making growth hormone or anything that's going to help us rejuvenate, which you can extrapolate out into long-term health issues and weight gain and you know whatever living under constant stress looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? There's when we think of regulation, we only think of self-regulation. What you beautifully illustrated is what's called auto-regulation.
Hmm.
And there's auto-regulation, self-regulation, and co-regulation. All of them, I look at it, there's no hierarchy. It's like the body is so wise that when we don't have the ability to regulate ourselves, it will try to find safety outside of us. And
Yeah.
essentially, if we have no sense of self-relating, of kind of like what we talked about, like being with the body and grounding into it, those then become habits again, right? We think like, oh, this is a bad habit. It's no, but it started with your body trying to regulate your nervous system to either
Yeah.
settle it down or activate it as needed to allow you to perform and live and survive. So I look at it as like, again, like when you mentioned before, Seema, about compassion for your parents, it's also compassion for your body of how hard it's been working to keep you, like we've been regulating whether we've been doing it consciously or not, and then we pick up these habits or these personas and we're like, oh, this is so bad about me, but like no, but this is what preserved you for you to be sitting here in this moment, so we have to take a
Hmm.
moment to honor it. But once you know better, you can absolutely like work with yourself to be able to heal yourself.
Absolutely. I feel like this is why my yoga practice is so important for me, is because it does help you get into the idea of this is what it's like to be regulated. And, it's interesting, the more and more I delve into it, you notice like, oh, I'm like holding tension in my hip in a funny way, or I'm sucking in my stomach when I should just be like feeling psychologically safe enough to relax. So what's that
Hmm.
about? But I think it's also interesting, and that's why we'll always, advocate for us as adults to make time, even if it's just for one yoga pose a
Hmm.
day, to
Mhm.
really, even if you never go upside down on your head, you never twist into a pretzel. That's not what it's about. It's about putting your body in a slightly abnormal position and finding ways to see where that discomfort is, finding ways to release that discomfort. It's so powerful. But I think it's also important to see that, like kids, when she was a baby, it was so funny. Anytime Manish and I would hug or like share like a little moment of affection, even as young as 18 months, she would get so jealous and she would just drop into a child's pose. She was so angry about the fact, I don't know what it was about that, but it's kids are so intuitive about how they will drop into something without even thinking about it just to help them self regulate.
Hmm.
But what I wanted to ask you was, we're often told like we think to ourselves, oh, I was just born this way. Oh, this is the result of societal programming. And what you're saying is that it's a trauma response. So you talked about fawning being the trauma response, but can you delve a little bit more into what that means? Because for most of us, like, we're not always conscious of the one incident or the multiple incidents that created that trauma.
Yes, absolutely. And I think so fawning is the performative nature that so it can manifest out as people pleasing. It's
Hmm.
essentially anytime we have an authentic expression that we squash or we suppress down, and then we perform in a way because we're attuned to that person. What will make them happy? What would make me avoid the conflict or a disagreement or an uncomfortable situation? So that's why it's the self-preservation. And so people pleasing is just the more that we do it, it's just like our attunement is outward focused. So when grow up in a home, I love how Gabor Mate says it. He's like, trauma is not just the bad stuff that happens to you. It's when, the good things that are supposed to happen to you don't happen to you, right? So
Mm,
right? Isn't that one so, oh, that one
so
like hits
good.
so good.
That's
Um,
good.
and yeah, he's such a pearl of wisdom. But that to me is like the essence of how this gets born. It's not like we had malicious parents who were trying to make us people pleasers or to succumb to their will. It's just that for me, I can speak very openly is that having a mom who was so uh emotionally unstable that the home environment was always catered towards what's her mood, what's her emotions, what's her state. You grow up in a state of hypervigilance
Hmm.
constantly, like from the young age of like 4. I'm constantly attuned to what is her face, how loud are the pots going into the sink, what are her footsteps, what's the tone of her voice. You really just become so hyper aware of your surroundings and what is that other person's state of mind. And
Yeah.
it just becomes incessant because anyone who grows up with that, insecure attachment mood, your baseline is dysregulation. Like you're
Hmm.
not at a baseline of cool, calm, and collected. It's like you're a little bit elevated in this state of like constantly being on. And that actually feels familiar. That's
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
the tricky thing. Like it's a sense of familiarity when your baseline is like something feels off, like there's something that can be just lurking around the corner.
Yeah.
And for me personally, this was a real embarrassing, rude awakening in the best way possible. But because like years ago, I want to say it's like been 3 years, I was doing all the yoga and the meditation and the mindfulness and being very self-aware and, on the journey. But every night, I would have this incessant need to binge watch reality TV, specifically Real Housewives. And it was like becoming like this thing of like, if I watch television, that was the thing that I was watching. And
Hmm.
it took me 3 years to kind of understand, like, wait, why am I watching this? Because I'm feeling, once I started doing the somatics, I'm like, oh, I'm feeling everything that they're feeling. Like, why am I doing this to myself? Like, my normal life is not chaotic. Like, I'm not attracting this in my normal life, but why am I so obsessed and like almost like addicted to this?
Mm.
And that was my awakening, that was like my hit of dopamine. It's like my hit of cocaine that
Yeah.
gave me that elevated baseline that I felt comfortable with, that was my familiar from my childhood.
Hmm.
And so it from that space, it was like, okay, well, I got to do this cold turkey because I'm a cold turkey kind of gal. And I ripped off the band-aid and and it was like a withdrawal. It was because I was for the
Wow.
first time sitting with the emotions of like, this
Yeah.
is what this show was bypassing me to feel, like really settle down into a cool, calm, regulated state for more than just the 20 minutes that you're on the yoga mat or the meditation mat.
Yeah.
Can you really
Hmm.
live from that place? And granted, you need an activation and
Yes.
deceleration in your nervous system, but can I come back to an actual normal baseline? And so, it was just as you mentioned before, Dinesh, about auto regulators. That was my huge auto regulator that kept me stuck in that state. And
Yeah.
so as we kind of remove kind of those, whether it's like alcohol, like whatever it may be for us, it's so different, like scrolling or binge watching, or is it a specific type of, when you take away that food or that thing that was your sense of safety, now you have to cultivate that within yourself. And
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
that's where that trauma response is, because it's what keeps you buffered from being your authentic self and feel your authentic
Hmm.
feelings.
Hmm. Isn't I feel like everyone on the planet is going to hate me for this question right now, but I'm still going to ask it. Uh, isn't busyness also in that category, especially for a lot of parents where they feel like they should be doing more, so they're constantly doing and doing and doing and doing, almost on a hamster wheel. And in the busyness, we lose the ability to actually sit with what is driving that busyness and
Hmm.
address it. And almost like alcohol or shopping or, binge watching TV, we're using the busyness to distract ourselves away from something that is really irking us. I don't know, whatever it could be. It could be with our kids, could be just with our careers where they are, our own relationships with our parents, or anything that's going along. And rather than allow ourselves to go through that wave, to sit with it, and then to really think about how this is serving us or what we can do or what we want to change, that 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 activity or experience is so painful that we spring into action. We do something else. Like we got to go
Hmm.
grocery shopping, or we got to take the kid here, or I got to go to the gym or something. And I feel that is more prevalent than many of us want to admit. I think it
Hmm.
shows up in both men and women,
Hmm.
and that we're not doing enough, so let's do more, right? And I feel like you're an expert on this. I feel not because you've gone through it, but because you've studied it and you coach a lot of people. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about how one could bring it up if they see it in somebody, right?
Mm.
To address it.
Yeah.
And two, um, what is the antidote? And to me at least, the antidote is, force yourself to sit there until the emotions passes, you're bored, and slowly reclaim the ability to not have to rely on a crutch to process these deep feelings. But like I said, I think the internet's going to hate me, but I still asked it. So save me, Seema, save me.
we
I'm
we
drowning.
don't hate
Save me.
you.
So glad you asked us because this is like, we cognitively we know this. This is one of those things like, oh, busy addiction, hustle culture, all these things, we're aware of it.
Yeah.
So let's look at it from a somatic lens and like really break this down. So somatically, anytime we feel any sort of activation, it's like when we're revving up our
Hmm.
energy, like revving up
Hmm.
our speed. So
Hmm.
think about how fast you're talking, how fast you're moving, how fast you're thinking. What's the tone of your voice, right? So urgency, desperation, force, effort is your first sign that your nervous system is starting to get out of what is called the window of tolerance, or what I say that I can handle it window, to now you're reaching your edge. And that's the first sign. So even just getting aware of when your mind is moving faster than your body is like when you're talking fast, when you're walking fast, when you're like moving from one thing to the next. If you have enough awareness to catch that in yourself, that's the first inclination that you are now on the trajectory to eventually potentially hit a trauma response. Whether you're where you're going to lash out or you're going to fall. Usually the most typical thing is that we lash out or
Hmm.
we flee. So which we just like feel like overwhelmed. But that's the first thing, is being aware of what's happening in your body. And I think in
Hmm.
those moments, because there's an activation of energy, and from an Ayurvedic lens, it's like your vata dosha is imbalanced now. It's getting you're moving, it's like moving very quickly. And you can feel it if you tune into your mind. It's like there's like a hurricane that's kind of like formulating in your mind. So almost in that moment, if you can catch yourself when you are talking fast, walking fast, thinking fast, it's just slow it down a notch, because you have to
Hmm.
titrate this in. You can't go from zero, like from 100 to zero. So it's titrating yourself like, okay, I got to slow it down a notch. So if you're typing an email,
Yep.
slow your fingers down, because of the mind body connection, it's easier to enter the body, because what you're actually
Yeah.
trying to escape is the sensation. And you
Hmm.
might not even be aware. You might have had a thought that came in and it created an activation in your body. So what we're actually trying to escape is the feeling of that sensation, and we'll do it
Right.
through our mind or being active and distracted. So
Yeah.
if you slow it down a notch, eventually, if you're typing slow, or if you notice if you're talking to someone, you're like, okay, let me just like slow down the pace that I'm talking at, you'll notice that your body starts to settle, and then you'll be able to access the ability to take a deep breath. As you are able to do that, your mind is going to slowly follow along with when you're breathing and your body settles. You'll feel an actual settling down of you're like reaching your edge and you're like coming down. That sense of urgency and desperation starts coming down. So
Hmm.
if a person can just become aware when that sense of urgency starts taking place, even if you're in the midst of it, it's like slow it down a notch. That's it. If you can do that, then you'll be able to have access to all this ability to then like be like more mindful, where your mind slows down and your body catches up, and then you're now in alignment. And the goal is that you're able to use your higher mind to then formulate with intention what you're doing, right? Not to rush around like, okay, if I'm going to wash dishes, I'm going to do this with freaking intention. Like every single moment can be used to bless yourself and the world with a prayer. Like as I wash these dishes, may the world be like cleansed with fresh clean water. Like I create it into like a living prayer. And when you look at life kind of like that, where it's not just you, you'll bring more intentionality into your life, just simply. And that's the second step, is by simply just slowing it down a notch. Bring your own awareness back to what you're doing first, and once you start doing that, you can use every single moment that you're aware to be of service to yourself and to others, just by your intentions and your thoughts.
Yeah. So the outcome of not people pleasing, or maybe being able to set boundaries with more compassion, sort of happens as a byproduct of you aligning your emotional and your mental and your physical state to be one at to be in peace, right? And in harmony with one another is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think what I really want the listeners to know is that it's not this like desire or this need to be like peaceful all the time and to be like
Right.
confident. That's just not possible. It's
Right.
just
Sure.
to slow it down a notch. And that's like been my mantra. Is like, okay, if I'm walking to the car, I just did this morning. I knew that I felt like this, like I'm going to be late. Okay, what it's the idea of lateness, which is propelling me into this state of urgency. And it's like, okay, can you just walk a little bit slower? Like and a lot of one thing that really helps me, especially in the state of urgency, is flash forwarding a couple hours. Like if it's like getting the kids ready for school and it's like chaotic, I imagine myself at 10 a.m. when I'm sitting at my desk, everybody is where they need to be, and inviting that moment of that settledness into that moment right now. And you can do it. You can just fast forward to when this is not going to be your reality and bring that peace into this moment, because
Mhm.
everybody in the moment you kind of lose sight that everybody
Right.
is going to get where they need to be, but bring that like just bring that awareness, like okay, like, or sometimes it's like fast forward to the end of the day. Like if it's a really, really hard day, like a crappy day, like, okay, imagine yourself in your bed. Like everybody's going to be asleep. This day is going to end.
Yes.
Moment of peace that you feel then, you can bring it here and then move into whatever that you're doing with that sense of like settledness. Even if it's 5%, it's better than that, like being on your edge and kind
All the
of
time.
working through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
guys know who Carl Winslow is?
Oh, I love Carl Winslow.
No, I don't know
Yeah.
Carl Winslow. Who is
I
he?
think you do. I
Do
think you
I?
You
do.
do.
I think you do.
Isn't it Family Ties? No.
No, Family Matters.
Oh,
Family
Family.
Matters
Oh,
with Steve
yes,
Urkel, right?
yes, I
So
do.
Did
Carl
I do
Winslow,
that?
yeah, Carl Winslow used to say 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. What the heck is bothering me, right? And I actually say that quite a bit because I used to watch Family Matters when I was younger, and it's remarkable. Like if I think back, how many times I have to slow myself down, right? 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. What the heck is bothering me? And just recently on Saturday, Seema and I were recording, and my son had a football game where he broke his finger, right? And we didn't know he had broken his finger. We thought he jammed it. He actually went back into the game, caught a touchdown with the same hand with a broken finger, and then we go. And he was not crying. He wasn't in pain. He was fine. Had an ice pack on, and I remember saying like almost what you said was like, okay, we'll fast forward. What are they going to do, right? It's a finger. There's not much you can do for it. You'll splint it, you'll cast it, whatever, but it's going to heal, right? I've had broken fingers. My wife's a pediatrician, things like that. And I said 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. Like what's bothering me? What's the urgency? And that allowed us significantly to approach it in a way that didn't amplify the response for my son, right? Because I could see if we were like, oh, it is a big deal, like, oh my God, like you're gonna have to have surgery, we got to go right now, it would bring up in him a lot of like, okay, am I gonna be okay? Like if you guys are freaking out,
Right.
what am I doing not freaking out, right? And when you mentioned like, fast forwarding, like, yeah, we missed a flight to go to Disney World. It's okay. Disney World's not going away, right? Yeah, we couldn't get there today, or like yesterday, for example, we missed the soccer game. I thought it was on Saturday, but it was yesterday, right? And we were watching on a TV, like, you know what? So what? There's another soccer game. We'll catch it another day. And so I think that's really, really valuable advice, not only in the parenting, but in the profession, in the career. We have to be the agent of calm. And if
Mm-hmm.
we can be the agent of calm, the mirror neurons in our minds, the
Mm-hmm.
emotional contagion, we can pass that on. We can give that gift of calmness to the people around us
Mm-hmm.
and elevate everyone. So good.
Oh, I love that.
So what else can we do, Thejal? Because I know we're so focused on ourselves, and rightfully so. It's completely understandable. We don't want to be constantly in this state of people pleasing and not being able to say what we want to say and set boundaries. But we also, many of our listeners are parents, and we got these trauma responses through generations before us. So Dinesh, you mentioned a great way to, not propagate this, but what other ways can we help our kids um, maybe not experience the same types of experiences, or at least not have them be so heavy?
Yeah, I love this. So, as I mentioned before, you can't have a conversation about fawning or, people pleasing without boundaries, right? And so a lot of what our children learn is through our ability to hold set firm boundaries without our need to, and being fluid and embodied boundaries. Like in the moment, are we tuning into our capacity to hold that boundary? Or are we bypassing, setting really rigid, firm, what is a boundary, but it feels more like a rule or a
Mhm.
law. And so it's the way that we are in relationship with setting boundaries. Can we be clear, honest, firm? And also be empathetic because it is their right to push back and not like our boundaries. And if you really
Mm.
look at the essence of it, why people are so scared of expressing their truth is because nobody's going to clap your hands, be like, good for you for setting your boundary and setting your capacity. If they're emotionally dependent and codependent on you, they're going to want to push back so their needs are being met.
Mhm.
So, really, for us to build the capacity to hear their no, to build the capacity to sit with them being disappointed at, like when we set boundaries, for them to dislike us. That was a big thing for me. Can I sit with the
Mm-hmm.
emotion and the sensation with my child not liking
Mm-hmm.
me and
Mm-hmm.
not taking it on as a reflection of who I am as a parent, of a good parent? And
Mm.
that's a big thing. Why we bypass
Huge.
boundaries is because we cannot sit with the idea of being mean daddy and being mean mommy, or because of the fear that we're going to mess them up and destroy our connection. But we are here to set boundaries. That's our job, but their job is equally to
To
push
push.
the
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah.
Not comfortable, but it is their job.
Right.
It is their job to be allowed to be unhappy with the boundary. And for us to also, like, I think, it's, you can only teach what you're practicing. And is like, are we building the capacity to handle their no, to
Yeah.
settle with their disappointment, to their
Mm.
disagreements, to when they're disrespecting us? Can we create it where there is not this level of I'm
Yeah.
taking it personal because it's a reflection of me, versus I can sit with this. You saying that created a pain in my heart. But can
Hmm.
we also find that sense of safety, just like what we talked about? Just a part of your heart will feel that charge, but another part of your body, if you, and it could be the same part, and be like, I'm actually really glad that they're sharing what they feel. Like they're just
They
so,
feel safe
and
enough.
they feel safe that they're saying, like, and or they're being, in the sense of like being disrespectful, right? That's like the one that's like, oh, I can't, how dare you saying that? It's a lot of our overcouplings from our childhood of like
Hmm.
feeling misunderstood, lacking
Hmm.
agency of being able to express ourselves. And that's where it propels out into this space of like lashing at our kids or like demanding them to behave in a specific way. And it's like, if you can in your body somatically create the space of like, oh, this is me, and that wasn't comfortable that they said that, but they're in their dysregulated state. I can witness them in their dysregulated state, and that has nothing to do with me. That has
Hmm.
nothing
Yeah.
to do with me. And my job as a parent is not to fix or manage their nervous system.
Yeah.
Their emotions are there, and it has no reflection of me as my worth as a mother or a father. That is where the beauty of like where we can build the capacity, especially in our relationship with our children, where we don't want disconnection. We want that more than anything. We allow them the autonomy to have their agency to speak, but not bypassing boundaries. If your child says something, be like, I think there were, I get it. I'm sorry, I didn't see that you were going to the bathroom, or you were doing, like, this is a big thing for us. It's like, Ayan, time to go to the bathroom to brush your teeth. Can't you see I'm walking? And it's like,
That
getting
would
it's
get me.
coming out of nowhere, and then it's like, oh, sorry bud, I didn't see you, but I think there's a kinder way for you to say that next time.
Yeah.
And that, even like before, I used to take it so personally before I like
Mm-hmm.
do the somatic work, and like, how dare you talk to me that way, or like, don't talk to me like that, and then after like just that expression of me handling it differently and be like, oh, sorry, I didn't see you. But I think there was a kinder way for you to say that. And then just leaving it at that, he
Yeah.
very easily catches up to the fact that I didn't get dysregulated by him. Like, hey, mom, I really shouldn't have like snapped at you. I just woke up and I'm
Yeah.
tired, you know? And
Yeah.
there's nothing like it's, and you do it not to change their behavior, but it's like their body can feel the safety in your body.
Hmm.
And I think that's the greatest lesson that
Yeah.
Yeah.
we have to just be in tune with our own capacity and what it's bringing up with our relationship with them. And as we do that, you're essentially just giving them the stronghold of like, hey, I
Right.
noticed that you don't have capacity for that. Like you're learning to respect their no's and their
Yeah.
boundaries.
Hmm.
It
Uh,
is. I've seen that. I've seen that with my own kids, especially, as middle school approaches, like we have our own baggage with middle school and our own traumas with middle school. And sometimes I think to myself, I would have never talked to my mom that way. I would have never dared to even, like, I never would have even gone there. And then I think to myself, yeah, I wouldn't have gone there because I didn't feel safe to go there.
Hmm.
And if I think about, well, my child feels, whether he's conscious of it or not, safe enough to have that snap at me or dysregulate or whatever and actually voice that, that's far better than me tamping it down and squishing it down into my body and then creating dis-ease that eventually can create disease,
Hmm.
right? Um, I'm not speaking like it took me forever to figure out how to be confident with what I wanted to say and really, really believe that what I had to say was valuable. So
Yeah.
in the long run, I would rather him pop off and then be able to allow his body to guide himself back. Like that intuitive wisdom, I don't have to force him to apologize because
Yeah.
he will, right? He'll see it eventually. And even if he doesn't, that those subconscious plantings will come to bloom and fruition and you'll see it eventually.
Yeah.
um and I think the biggest aha moment for me, just to be fully vulnerable and transparent, because I think that's I think it's helpful when we're able to do that, is when my son, or daughter, get really angry and hijacked. um I couldn't figure out why I was reacting as the way I would. And then I just, over just a few weeks ago, recognized like, oh my gosh, even though, yes, I've gotten better with practice and things, I still would get, at certain days, certain times, very reactive. And I realized like, oh my gosh, when they get angry to that degree, what that's doing is putting me back into a time and space. My body is now the little girl version of me, and my mom or my dad or some auntie is yelling at me or judging me or telling me I'm not good enough. And so you're then reacting from that place of a scared child instead of a 40-year-old woman who's educated and has done, you know, enough to be able to fend for herself, right? So I think I love what you said about just being able to, are you willing to stick with it long enough to handle the ick that comes up? Because it will pass, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't stay there forever.
Absolutely. And you know what you shared, what it brings up for me is the recognition that, you know, as a parent, it's not just the boundary setting. We also have to be very vigilant of how, like, what we're doing. Like, when we look at it from a somatic lens, boundaries is like, what is your body's capacity, but also what is the capacity of the body receiving your
Hmm.
boundary? So with especially for our children, I mean, not all relationships, but for specifically with your children, for me, I had to hyper in tune. Like when we love to say like, oh, our kids are not listening or they're being disrespectful. It's like, but how am I setting the boundary? Like, am I coming in hot and heavy, or I'm already in this urgency mindset because I've been rushing around? What's my tone of voice? Like they are also very hyper vigilant to the external things around the boundary that we're setting. And so
Hmm.
one of the things that I really very, very intuitively focus on is, especially when I'm in that state of urgency that we talked about, and then now, right, you're bringing that energy and you're around your children, is like I have to, and I can very easily become very domineering, commanding, you know, demanding in my tone of voice of like, do this now, come on, hurry up, that sort of like energy, which I don't want to be. Is that I have to mentally, like when I'm slowing myself down a notch and I know that I have to connect to my kids, is I have
Hmm.
to lead with either one of these three things. uh either lead with a question, a compliment, or a or an observation.
Mm,
And those things, so it's like, hey, like, and that's been like my saving grace as far as like when I'm setting boundaries. It's like,
Mhm.
so it's not violating their body's
yes.
ability to like experience and hear what I'm trying to say.
I love that.
Yeah, so good. Tejal, I'm wondering if there's to come at this, there's another perspective to think about this. And when you were talking about Ayan and going to the bathroom and meeting his emotions and recognizing that those are his emotions, for me at least, when if I were to put myself in your shoes and that happening, what would cause the root that would cause my reaction, like don't talk to me that way or whatever, is heavily grounded in my own ego and my own insecurities
Mm-hmm.
and my need for respect and things like that.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot of times that is in tension with my ultimate goal, which is to allow my son or daughter or people around me to grow into themselves and their people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for what I have found works a little bit for me is to calm my ego down and recognize that, as I retreat, I am making space for them to take up that space. And ultimately, I'm going to fade away into nothing, right? And my son is going to be the head of the household,
Mm-hmm.
God willing, where he's going to be making the decisions and things like that instead of having to listen to me demanding or commanding him to do whatever. And I wonder if a lot of this comes back to not so in equal parts, I should say, or at least some level of relative parts, not only guiding our kids, but guiding ourselves and calming our ego down in
Mm-hmm.
listening to, well, why am I triggered that my son said, "Can't you see that I'm walking?" And
Mm-hmm.
hold up the mirror to ourselves. And what am I doing to elicit that reaction? And is it time for me to learn a little bit to give them a little bit of space, right? And you can't approach emotion with rational, right?
No.
You can't approach rational with emotional. And I almost feel that a lot of times that if a kid's yelling at you or someone's yelling at you, if you yell back, you're escalating it, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's just going to devolve into a full-out brawl, and someone's going to get a bloody nose. But the more I train my ego to take the back seat and let the other person's emotional wave ride, um, I feel that I feel there's something there that ultimately leads to a bit more of a productive experience
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to always trying to control the kid, right? I think there's a healthy dose of self-awareness and self-control that we're all learning because, we're all going through a lot of first-time experiences, right? And we forget that, you've never had a 13-year-old, you've never had a 19-year-old,
Yeah.
you've never had a daughter-in-law or a grandkid, right? Who says at 75 that you should be an expert at having a, a daughter who is now telling you that they are taking care of a child, right? Like, what makes
Mm-hmm.
sense? Why would you be an expert at that? How would you know how to handle that? All
Yeah.
right, I'll put the air back into the room because I've sucked it all out.
No, it's so true. I think it's never anytime anyone's having a lower vibration reaction like blame, shame, anger, fear, it's never about you. It's always
Mhm.
about them. It's always a project. And it's also easy to for our mirror neurons to say, "Oh, it is about me because I'm going to emulate that energy," right? So I think it's just important to call that out, and I'm so glad that you did.
No, that's why I love this opening, this point of conversation. People pleasing can lead into so many dimensions, like we covered, and we could probably talk forever. But I
Yeah.
really appreciated the dynamic conversation that we had about this.
Yeah. It's such a there are so many layers and there are so many things about people pleasing and how they show up for everybody so differently. So I'm glad that we kind of had this. But so you've taught us so much. And I'm curious to know, it could be more about the same topic, or it could be like Vasavi Kumar when she was on here, she taught us how to make a basic latte. Just like, what's like one thing in Tejal's world that you can quickly share with us to be like, huh, that's kind of cool slash useful slash just interesting.
Oh my gosh, goodness. What is so useful in my life? Okay, so there's one random thing I just saw that I really like doing.
Okay.
Okay,
The
so
best kind. Yeah.
okay, so I got copper. We all know, South Asians, copper, like, it's a electromagnetic frequency that cuts into the water that helps, like, rebalance our body. But I love creating affirmation water. And so my one affirmation that I've been doing every morning, so I'll fill up the water and then I'll close my eyes and I do a breath to bring my higher self and I put my hand over it and I say, something amazing is going to happen today and I'm going to be awake to experience it.
Ooh.
That's how simple it is, but like that helps me just stay aware. And then at the end of the day, I just have a one sentence journal. And my job at the end of the day before is like to write down like what is that one. And it's never like this extravagant thing, but the beauty of like making the attention that something amazing is going to happen today, that little thing is like boom, like big, like you will celebrate it like it's a really big thing. So that's my thing.
So
Has
cool.
has it ever become where the water turns into a Moscow Mule? Is that the amazing thing that happens? Because that's a cup.
Love.
That's a cup. When you brought it onto the show, I was like, all right, we're gonna have a good time. She's already got a Moscow Mule.
Yeah, they're drinking about. No, I know they are Moscow Mule glasses, but I just, I like the metal. They were just pretty, so they're just pretty.
Good stuff. Good stuff. That's great. I love that. We have a little section called Ask It Forward, where the previous guest, without knowing who you were or what you stood for or anything about you, left you a question completely, putting it out into the universe. So we'll ask you that question. It's from Abhijit Baduri, who is another force of nature. He is just a talent managing strategist. He's worked for Microsoft and Wipro. And just yesterday, he was in the Times of India. His article on branding was in the Times of India. So I'll ask you the question Abhijit left for you, and then you get to have a little fun and leave a question for someone else and who we don't know who it is. So Abhijit's question, it's a good one. What would you do if you didn't have to worry about the consequences?
I would go. Okay, you're gonna think this is crazy. I would go into an ocean completely naked and take it in. So
I
I would just like and just like be like without the filter of like, oh, just like be with the salt water and like somewhere, for me, what I'm thinking is like somewhere very prestigious, like the clean part of the Ganga, and like immersing myself completely naked into that space and just
ooh,
surrendering.
I
wow.
love it.
Cold plunge.
Yeah,
Cold
cold plunge.
in the clean Ganga, naked. That's what I would do.
Ooh.
I'll give you the chance to give a equally powerful question for the next guest.
Oh my gosh, I feel like how am I gonna live that one? Okay, my question is, what is one tender childhood moment that left you feeling embarrassed that still haunts you today?
I remember being 7 and um, it was the career day at school and we didn't have a lot of money. And so all my clothes were hand-me-down clothes. And I remember the nicest thing I owned was this like denim skirt with white fringe and these pink cowboy boots. I don't remember what my shirt was like. Um, but I remember saying I didn't know what I wanted to be or what career options there were. And so I said, I want to be a model. And everybody laughed.
Mhm.
Cringe. It was so sad. But here we are. I survived.
That part of you still lives in you that I feel in
Yeah.
my heart. I feel that tender
Yeah.
in my heart.
You're a model.
It-
You're a role model, you're an influencer. And I mean, have you seen the clothes this woman wears on Instagram now? She's got I mean,
Stylist is like
I
it's
know.
far beyond that. It's like you said, it's like you're a thought influencer.
I love
Yes.
it. I
Well,
love it.
Liz Wendler of Liz Wendler Styling has been fantastic. But yes, it is. I think it's definitely something that I can share now, and it like. but then I have proof, right? I have proof that I actually, all of those thoughts were not true. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So good. Tejal, you make both of our lives better, I think. And it's not limited to that. You are just a breath of fresh air. You and Chirag are great people, and we look forward to staying in touch and supporting each other on this journey. But when I say that, I feel a little selfish because we're connected with one another. We have each other's emails, phone numbers. We see into each other's lives through Instagram. And I think a lot of people can benefit from having the type of influence you put out into the world. So tell everyone, where can they find you, if they can connect with you, where they can find your book. Tell us about your new book and all the amazing things that you're doing to make this world a better place. Tell everyone how they can learn more.
Yeah, so my little pocket in the corner in the internet, Tejal V Patel is my Instagram handle where I share really it's like a smorgasbord of like spiritual truths, parenting related, life related. I have a podcast called the Time and Talks podcast, which is evolved into more solo casts. So when I have a lot to say about a lot of stuff. So when it goes deep and I see the need from my community, I will go deeper into a topic. There's a lot more on this specific topic, but we talked about nervous system regulation and all that on there. And yes, meditation for kids, you can find it anywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Target, you can wherever you buy books, you can find meditation for kids. And my next book, I just finished my outline and I'm sent it to my editor. Fingers crossed, and we're gonna start sending it out to send it out to get a literary agent and a publisher. So we're still in the
Amazing.
beginning phases of that, but when there's more news on that, I'll definitely come back on the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. And
love it.
absolutely. We'll come back on and share all about the book. We cannot wait. Before we say goodbye, we benefit so much from just having this conversation. Our listeners get so much from it. But we also at Happy and Human want to make sure that people who don't even know about the podcast or who the heck we are still find benefit in the fact that we come together and do what we do. So in that spirit, we are going to ask you, Tejal, what is one nonprofit cause or organization that Dinesh and I can make a small contribution to sort of just keep our message and our amplification of all that is wonderful in this world going?
Yeah. So Chirag has been heavily involved, and we are heavily involved in different ways, but Spread the Joy Foundation, they specifically work with creating boxes for pediatric patients who are long-term stays in the hospital. They create joy boxes, which has been created by different therapists and teachers. And I submitted my contribution is the mindfulness and the emotional regulation, but it's this fun, beautiful, curated box with just not only like things that they can do to engage in pastime, but also help them as they process the feelings of being in the hospital for an extended stay when they have uh, when they're hospitalized for a long time.
Oh my gosh, what a
Yeah.
beautiful, that hits me on so many levels. Just because, I mean, as you guys know, my husband's pediatric critical care, so he sees a lot of these kids. And
Mm.
so that's such a special cause.
Yeah, we'd be honored to make a contribution. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
So of
Yeah.
course, of course.